Hello everyone, this is my practice presentation of my capstone project VR video game named Your Friendly Neighborhood Witch VR. I have developed it for NYU XR Developer Certification Program as the capstone project final presentation. Um, this is intended to be created for an audience of investors or employers, and some of the slides in this presentation might be taken out depending on the audience. A little bit about me. My name is Oz. I'm a lifelong gamer and I have been working on making indie video games since 2016. I've got interested in VR after I played Half-Life Alyx several years ago. I'm going to first go over the planning phase of this project and then talk about how I developed it, and then I'll finish with what I have learned from this experience. Let's start with planning. Your Friendly Neighborhood Witch is a PC VR adventure game where you run a magic shop while trying to break a curse that turned you and your two friends into voodoo dolls. After I came up with the idea, I have received some motivation from the games that you see on the right here, some simulation games where you run shops, and some wizardry magic kind of games. I pitched the idea with a similar elevator pitch that I have just shown on Reddit and some other platforms, and there were a lot of people saying they would play that game. That sounded interesting. They gave a lot of encouragement, and I was really happy. This is the initial style frame I came up with. I wanted to create a mystical, dark witch shop where the player would feel like a witch and would be able to do a lot of crafting and experimentation and go through stories. And I wanted to create 4 schools of witchcraft: potion, clairvoyance, arcane, and manipulation. And then we have got some corresponding colors that represent those schools throughout the game, and those colors are prevalent along with black and yellow. I've used the Metal Mania font a lot throughout this game. I love it and I believe it fits in really nice. I came up with 3 pillars for my game vision to keep me on track and make sure that I am aware of what is important. Number 1 is experimentation. I want the player to be able to play around with magic, with potions, with voodoo dolls, and with all sorts of witchcraft. I also would like to have a heavy emphasis on the story. I would like the experimentation to feed the story and vice versa, having a constant interplay between these 2 different aspects of the game. And I want it to be a game of all the player should be saying wow all the time. So that those 3 are my goals. Every time I'm in dubbed, I was going back and checking, is what I'm doing right now, is it really helping one of these pillars? I started with some assumptions. I wanted to make sure it's a high-end PC VR game. This is not for a mobile Quest 2 type of hardware. It will require a good machine to be able to work at full capacity, but I want it to be optimized for lower end machines so people could play the game with lower graphics. I get a modest system here, and I wanted to make sure that my system would be the minimum specs and it would run at a good frame rate on my system. I also assumed that this would be for players who are comfortable with some medium level of VR, cyber sickness, there's teleportation. I was thinking about adding vignettes while the player was accelerating. It wasn't necessary from the tests that I have seen. There's combat involved, so it might create some discomfort. And also I wanted to make sure that I have got a consistent story with a start, middle, and an end. This is a small portion of the big story at the release level of this game, about 1/30th, and it corresponds to about 20 minutes of gameplay based on what I have experienced with the tester so far. This is the scene flowchart. The white rectangle represents the part that I wanted to complete for this capstone as my MVP version 0.1. I was able to complete the lobby, the uh, the main dish, which is the maze, the intro level, and the foundation of the witch shop. So you can do some basics. I couldn't even get started with quest 1, so that is going to need to move into the release window. All the other parts, the additional quests, will be what's going to be driving the game. These are side quests, and there is a main quest also interwoven through them, and then there is a finale to the game, and you can finish the game with some multiple endings. These are the characters drawn by my two wonderful kits. They also represent images drawn by a kit in the game, and these are what they look like inside the game. This is your player character here. You start by interacting with these two friendly looking characters. There are some hostile characters that try to rip your stitches apart, and then there's this mysterious character that interacts with you by the end of the game. The maze is the main dish of the game. You start here having amnesia, and you talk to this character, and she kind of fills you in about who you are, or at least what she tells you who you are, and then she sends you on a mission to save you and Nestor and herself, Farah, from their dull state. So the player has got some options as they move along. They can go ahead and find that there is a enemy doll here, which they cannot pass without getting the fire wand from Nestor here. And there's also an area here to respawn lost objects. And the player can either fight this monster with a fireball, or they can just get closer and hit them with the scorch wand. Both of them help take down this monster. And then the player will need to eliminate the three dolls here. There is a water doll, a fire doll, and a spirit doll. It's sufficient for a player to beat the water doll, and they can get the heart, and they could speed run and dodge through the needles being thrown by the needle doll here. Her name is Ludmila. It's kind of hard for an initial player, but I had some students who was able to pull it off and then get to here, place the missing heart of Nitya, this character here, which opens the door, can pass through it, activate the teleportation altar, and exit the game. So this is possible for speedrunning, but most players haven't figured that out. They died here pretty quickly. The alternative is to get the heart and fight the fire elemental, and then there is a half wall here. You can throw the heart above the wall, because you can carry on one item at a time. If you can't manage to pass through here with the heart, you have to throw it and go back and get the shield after defeating the spirit elemental, and then use the shield to protect yourself from the barrage of needles, and then drop the shield and get the heart, place it, and then pass through the level. So that was pretty much the idea, to give the player multiple ways to advance through the level. And this is pretty much the storyboard of what I have explained. You start at the lobby. You may go to the sandbox shop, or you can start the story. There is an optional tutorial. You take the fireband from Nestor, fight the monsters, and then if you want, you may throw the heart, shield, or dodge through this doll here, and then exit the level, and then you get to the witch shop, which starts the main quest after this intro, which is the MVP for this project. When you get to the witch shop in the sandbox mode, or after you finish the intro level, there are four main areas. There is a potion area, there's a fortune area, there's an arcane area, and there's a voodoo area. You kind of pretty much mix potions in the potion area. There isn't much in the game at this point in terms of mixing. The fortune area helps you see the future, and some of your customers you will be able to solve their problems using the fortune area. Arcane area is where you deal with the general magic with wands and spell casting, And then voodoo area is where you can manipulate other NPCs by some voodoo magic using different dolls that have different effects. While before making the game, some design considerations that I had in mind was to make sure that I do not um, make the player suspend their disbelief that they are in a game. And I really thought it was important to avoid any artificial UI elements such as windows that pop up in the air. Um, Anything that seemed to be um, possible through magic is in the game, but similar to what you see in this picture here with the quill, even the menu itself is a magic book, and there's another magic quill here. If you press something, the other quill kind of makes the options appear on the page. So that was a big goal of mine. I wanted to make sure that the whole experience felt like a real walk through a magical world instead of constant reminders that you are in a game environment. Another one was to make sure that there are a lot of clues about what's going on, what the story is, what took place in the past, by giving environmental clues, constantly world building. I've been able to do that to some extent. There is much more that I can add, but there is so much time. In this example, there is a monster here on the ground. They apparently fought, and he was defeated, and Nestor here is kind of wounded when he's talking to. Its third consideration was to find excuses for the VR necessities that are not super realistic. Things such as not having connected arms. There's a magical explanation that you hear during the tutorial, and the fact that you can teleport around. Again, there is a magic wand that makes you teleport around, and there's a necessity in the story for that. Your legs aren't working. And also, I wanted to provide tons of choice to the player so they can solve challenges in different ways, and I was super happy during testing that different players tried to solve it differently and they were successful. I wanted them to struggle, and this is going to be a balancing issue. Some players were happy, some players got too frustrated. For some players, the game is too easy. So I would like to add some difficulty settings and some timed hints in the future. When I got into the development process, I created my milestones for the MVP. I started at 0.0, and 0.1 would be my MVP. So I'm on the early pre-alpha stages of my development. And this is my crunch calendar, mostly for October and a little bit of November. And I try to organize the level in a logical way, making sure that I stayed organized throughout. These are all my scripts that I have created so far. The core gameplay and all the additive scenes that get added on top of this core section, which has the player and the managers. So you first go to the lobby, then you may go to the maze or the shop, and these scenes get added on top of the core. And as you can see, I've got some main folders, and then you open them up, I got the characters and all those other game objects that are used for organization. My coding architecture revolves around having core managers that take care of what happens in any given situation. When an additive scene is loaded, the scripts here find those managers, and then when managers need to do something about the level, they go ahead and find the level settings, and those level settings is going to include all the information about the level. So that was the logic I was following. My initial iteration early on back in May 2022 was a keyboard and mouse gameplay. I really enjoyed this version a lot. I actually could continue making it just the first person which experience. It seemed to be working nice. I like the highlighting of the items and whatnot. And it gave me an initial perspective on what the game could be. Later on during summer, June, July, I worked on creating a VR version of this, and I made a little trailer of this. And it contains most of the main maze level with a bunch of bugs and a lot of features that were missing. Um, then I changed a lot of my systems to use additive scene loading when I learned how to do that during the um, course of the boot camp. And then at some point I made the leap of faith and I have changed my entire project into HDRP. I took a backup and then I was thinking I would probably need to go back and give up and continue with URP. But it worked out. It after maybe 1 week of changing all the materials and all the settings, I really loved the results. The game looked much nicer. I never wanted to go back again. Despite all the challenges, I had to go through each and every material and create um, mask maps for pretty much every material that I had used earlier. I loved the looks. I loved everything about HDRP, and I wanted to keep it. And this is what my game looks like now. These are the most recent additions after I moved into HDRP and a bunch of um, cleaning. Um, the game has got a lot more features, even though not even close to where I want it to be um, by the time I'm at 0.2. And I'm working on updating my trailer. It's not here, but I've taken a bunch of screen recordings, so I'm working on updating it. This is the older trailer. And what I learned from this project, currently there are some bugs that I haven't really replicated any of these since I have made a lot of fixes, but some players reported these bugs. Some players stated that some of the objects still are in the wrong pose. Some items do not respawn when you try to make them respawn. I'm aware that when you're changing scenes, the fade is not working great. There are some artifacts and some of the objects look funny when you're holding them because the clamps do not really adjust to the objects at this time. They close and open at the same angle. I have started with a really low frames per second after I moved over to HDRP. I was at a good place with URP without most of the optimization methods. And I had to wait until I had the stable setting before I started going through my tricks of optimization. I used mesh baking, and I tried to reduce the polygons of all the objects except the ones that were really critical and that I wanted to look nice. I have used light probes for the dynamic objects throughout both the maze and the shop. And then I changed all of my real-time lighting into baked lighting, and I was super frugal about using real-time lighting. I only used it when necessary, and when those lights they were being turned on and off through the object streaming, along with many other things. Objects that were consuming, that had a bunch of scripts on that running on them, and that were consuming a lot of CPU power. They were being actively turned off when the player was leaving the scenes. I used the same volumes for object streaming and occlusion culling. The same occlusion culling volumes had colliders, trigger colliders in them that were turning major objects on other parts of the scene on and off depending on where you're at. And this has really worked, and I was able to get to 90 plus frames per second on computers that were using better than 2096 and above graphics card. On my 1080, I was mostly at 60s and 70s when I was testing on the build. I have gone through many challenges working on this project. One issue was that early on the players could go through the walls, and that killed the puzzle. I have created a script that made sure that the wand was disabled when it was if you try to push your hand through a wall and try to go into the next room, there was a collider on the walls that would actually turn the teleportation off, so you couldn't really ghost into the outer rooms easily. Similarly, if the player wanted to peek through a wall to see what's in the outer room, which also kills the engagement, I created a script that turns off the player's vision then the head collider is going into the trigger collider of the wall. The biggest challenge I had was rescaling. I really had a small game in mind in the beginning. As my ambition for the game increased, my initial coding structure turned out to be super tight, and I spent a lot of time going back and playing around with my code, trying to expand a bunch of things. I tried to throw in the same script into multiple scripts. It was a constant struggle to try to expand and scale, but I liked where I got to. URP to HDRP transformation was very challenging, but it was definitely worth it. Some obstacles, the main obstacle I had was an issue with item loss. Every time the player died, the item in their hand would go through a bunch of bugs, and I spent a lot of time finding the source of those issues, and I tracked it down to the actual code on the objects, the grabbable item code that comes with extra interaction toolkits. And I was able to solve it that way. I stopped trying to disable those objects, and I started disabling their meshes, and that was my solution without messing with the original code from the interaction packet. I also had an issue with, I was creating the game in the dev mode where the Guardian was disabled. When I took it to other people for testing, they kept spawning at weird places instead of the starting positions, and it took me a while to figure out why that was, and it turned out that since I was developing without the Guardian, that was messing things up, so I started to develop with the Guardian on, so my players would have the same starting positions. Many of my testers had different perspectives about how hard or easy the game was, so it was hard to balance how much hints I was giving them. Some people got upset because there were too many hints and things were obvious, and for the same level, some people got upset because there weren't enough hints. So satisfying a wide base of players has been challenging. And one of the biggest challenges was to keep switching between the mindset of making an MVP for a capstone project versus creating the first level for a full release game I had in mind. For MVP, I wanted to show off everything that I could. For the full game, I wanted to do a slow burn and not put too much in the intro level. Right now, things are more geared towards the MVP, and when I revise things for the full game, I would like to take my time to make sure the player has got enough opportunities to learn any new tools they are given, instead of just being given one tool, use it once, and go grab another one. That's not good game design. But for MVP, I wanted to show off all those things in the small space and time that I had. Some things that worked are definitely the HDRP materials. I loved playing around with the HDRP, and I enjoy just getting into my own game now and doing some crazy stuff, getting the wand like in this picture and holding it to a random lantern glass and see the glass glow, and put the wand into the glass and see what happens. I absolutely love the way the game looks, and I got some positive comments and feedback from testers as well. The lighting and visual effects are also great. I've used a bunch of assets from other developers, such as this asset from Crypto here, the fireball and the sparks. I made major modifications to them, but I love the way they look, and I'm loving the story. It just came out of nowhere. I was creating the maze, I put in the dolls in here, and then it started coming. And I love the fact that for this project I had to write most of the code. In my previous projects I was using assets heavily and was coding as minimally as I could. And this time around I was able to eat the frog whole and do a lot of coding, and that felt great. Here are some numbers that represent the game development and what I did to make the current MVP come alive. And here are some random favorites that you may experience if you play the game. Here we got the wand charging. There are some visual clues and there are sound clues that the wand is charging. And you're teleporting. There's a trail. This on this picture, you're teleporting backwards. I'm holding the wands to my back and pressing the grip button. I kind of wanted to come over the fact that you're not traversing the game space linearly. The teleportation feels a little off sometimes, and I wanted the player to leave behind a trail that gave a sense of continuity and progress through the space. So the player doesn't see that when they are moving forward, but occasionally when you turn around, you see the trail behind you. It's a nice feeling. It amplifies that you're moving through the space. I spent a lot of time trying to balance how the melee worked. Earlier it was too easy because you could get closer to the enemies, and as soon as the tip of the wand touched the enemy, they would die. So I placed the collider here that avoids you getting too close. So the player has to lunge forward in order to make it hit. So it makes the player go through that motion instead of just teleporting into the characters and killing them. And I hope to establish some more sophisticated combat system moving forward. I love the way the ranged enemy character worked and how you can actually block the pins coming in and how they actually poke through the shield and how it looks. The summon space works really well. I like the way it looks with the particles and with the lights, telegraphing that your objects have arrived when you press them, and they only get teleported here if you've actually found them and used them, and they're not going to come here if they've never been touched. The teleportation altar here looks really cool. That's one of my favorites. I love the fireball and the sparks and the lights that they make, and I just got to start working on the functionalities inside the shop, so I'm loving these pins. They only work if you they only stay if you pinch them into the dolls, and they actually fall down if you just go ahead and leave them on air. I've started working on creating the website. This will be my asset kits. And on the next step, I'd like to add a dialogue skip. I'd like to make sure that the content is burned slowly enough so the player has time to digest, and I don't waste hours of work just for a single use by the player. I'd like to balance the hints so the game is desirable for both types of players. I'd like to add more quests and crafting, and I'd like to turn the combat into more of a mini game, similar to trying to dodge the pins. And here is a huge list of some goals for my version 0.2. And these are some of the biggest assets that I have used. I have used a lot of assets, and I have got those in a separate list. And I'd like to acknowledge my wife Nazlı, my two kids Okan and Alper, for testing and supporting me throughout this endeavor, and thank you for listening to my presentation.